First of all, thank you, Adekunle, and thank you, Monica, for your welcome remarks. And thank you, of course, for the audience for being here. Like, there are some familiar faces I knew before, and some I met during my first 6 weeks of my residency here at G.A.S Foundation. Some faces I don't know yet, but will hopefully get to know better during this evening. When I applied for this curatorial residency here at the G.A.S Foundation, which is part of the Turn 2 program of the German Federal Cultural Foundation, I had the plan to get to know and understand the art and culture scene in Lagos better. Lagos is not new to me. I was here last in 2019 with a similar attention. Then I was part of a curatorial intensive program of the Lagos Biennale. Before that, I was here with my parents and brother as a child. My mother grew up in Lagos, born in Abia State, so I'm not starting my research from scratch. Nigeria and its history are parts of my history and identity. I am in Lagos at an important time. Not only are the elections coming up, perhaps among the most important in the history of this country. This unrest, this swirling is amplified by a petrol shortage and an interesting attempt by the government to change banknotes, to put it mildly. In this context of a potential realignment of a nation that is not really a nation at all, at least not in the original sense of the word, in this context, a delegation of German museum professionals, cultural representatives, and political authorities traveled to Abuja and Benin City last December. This delegation brought with them a selection of so-called Benin bronzes, which were looted from the Oba's palace by British troops in 1897 and had ended up in the collections of German institutions. They were officially returned to Nigeria. More are to follow from other European countries and the United States. But what now? Africa's struggle for its art, as the latest publication of the expert on looted art and restitution, Professor Dr. Bénédicte Savoy, is called, seems to have reached a temporary climax. Bénédicte Savoy, by the way, co-authored the famous restitution report, commissioned by French President Emmanuel Macron in 2018 after he promised in front of a crowd of students in Ouagadougou to enable within the coming 5 years, quote, the temporary or definitive restitution of African heritage to Africa. Together with Professor Dr. Felwine Sarr, Bénédicte Savoy then traveled throughout the Francophone regions of Africa and did research in archives. Today, the publication is a central document on the basis of which restitution can be discussed. I find it so important because it conceptualizes restitution not only as an act of returning property, but much more broadly, including knowledge systems and cultural practices. Because, and this is what the unexpected lessons will also be about today, what exactly can or must restitution mean for Nigeria? In 1965, the poet and journalist Paulin Joachim drafts restitution as a counter-concept to racism and Eurocentrism. In his feature article by Bingo, a widely read monthly magazine in French-speaking Africa and the African diaspora, he deconstructs the colonial empire's rhetoric of legitimacy as lies and excuses and describes how the art from Africa brought to Europe around 1900 impacted the European art avant-garde like a blood transfusion. He complains about overcrowded museum storage facilities where, quote, bronzes and wooden figures from Africa stacked in a magnificent uselessness lie in the air-conditioned universe of galleries without sun and colors, where they carry on a high-flying monologue that neither collectors nor experts have ever understood. Social media recently circulated this article. Joachim is not interested in reckoning with the past, but instead looks into the future. We have long been portrayed as a people without culture and without a past. We never invented anything, nor could we ever sing about anything. The legitimate recovery of our fine arts could put an end to this historical lie. But how exactly can this recovery of our fine arts look like? That Africa would achieve more through access to its material cultural heritage, I think, does not need to be discussed further. An increase in dignity, autonomy, past history, and ideas for the future. Felwine Sarr and Bénédicte Savoy write in their report, the deprivation and loss of cultural goods affect not only the generations that practice them and suffer them, they are inscribed in the duration of societies and cause the flourishing of some and the decay of others. Exactly, but what specifically needs to happen for restituted artifacts to unleash this power of cultural flourishing? Unexpected Lessons number 4 is explicitly about focusing on debates in Nigeria. The first panel will discuss questions like, what does restitution mean beyond the return of looted artifacts? Do we need to decolonize European notions of restitution? Into which context do the objects return? How can objects be reintegrated into communities? How do they withstand the ethnological gaze? What kind of museums are needed? What kind of spaces for the imagination of possible futures? In what ways can communities be engaged in that process? What is needed to make the debate more accessible? At the same time, the focus cannot be on Nigeria alone, because Nigeria itself is a colonial product and cannot be conceived without Europe. Nigeria does not exist without Europe, and Europe does not exist without Nigeria until today. And any separation can only be an artificial one. The stories have long since become so interwoven that the question must rather be how best to deal with it now. Next slide. The second panel is unlikely to find an answer to this question, but might be a step into the right direction. What role do international NGOs play in this process? How important are collaborations between institutions within Nigeria and beyond? How can debates from other African countries be implemented into Nigerian discussions? What role does the diaspora play? It's about how we can unlearn Berlin. We will get back to that. And that refers to the borders that were drawn during the Berlin Conference in 1884-85. We speak English here, which is a colonial language. Somehow also quite useful to have a kind of lingua franca in which we can communicate. But what if English is not enough? When the exchange with neighboring African countries suddenly seems impossible because French is spoken there, or Portuguese, or even within Nigeria. What other forms, languages, and spaces of encounter are imaginable? How can meaningful relationships and networks be created across colonial borders? How can we avoid that everything always has to be played across Europe? How is a truly Pan-African future imaginable, and could the debate on restitution of African artifacts be a catalyst? I would like to tell a little story, one of my favorite stories from the large collection of restitution stories, and I always like to tell this one when I talk about restitutions, and many here will know the story already. In 1977, Nigeria hosted Festac 77, the Festival of Arts and Culture, an international Pan-African festival, the second of its kind to be held once a decade on the African continent to celebrate African heritage in formerly post-colonial times. The festival organizers chose the mask of Queen Idia, the mother of Isigi, the Oba of Benin, who ruled from 1504 to 1550 as the emblem of the festival, an ivory carving that is still in the British Museum in London. The organizers officially asked the museum to return the mask. The British Museum refused, citing concerns about the safety of the mask. This caused outrage in Nigeria and in the diaspora. A replica of the original mask was made in London, but the organizers rejected it. They had a replica made themselves, which was praised as being as artistically impressive, if not more than the original. The artist who made the replica is a descendant of the artist who created the original mask. What makes the Queen Idia mask case so interesting to me is the thought experiment that it makes possible. What would actually happen if no objects were reclaimed at all? Because their meaning, their spiritual energy, their heritage, or whatever is associated with them could be accessed in other ways, or if even completely different, new meanings and values were created. A thought experiment, as I said. Europe can keep everything. We create something new, own, future-oriented. We are creating new cultures that draw on pre-colonial knowledge and integrate the violent reality of colonialism in order to create a completely new, different future in the present. This sounds utopian, but I'm convinced that this is exactly the mindset it needs to make something fundamentally different. Always with the danger, of course, of falling back into old structures. How exactly do we create something that we know nothing about? In an ongoing process, and at this point, I would like to quote the Indian post-colonial professor Nikita Dhawan, we try and we fail, and then we try again and fail better. Before I briefly explain what is going on, what's going to happen here tonight, I would like to say something about the unexpected lessons. The number 4 is not a coincidence. There have actually been 3 issues before. More about that later. Unexpected lessons are part of the Talking Objects Lab. You see here a screenshot of the website. The lab is a think tank, exhibition and event series, all exploring forms and practices of knowledge and exploring strategies of education and visualization. We, that means me and my project partner Isabel Rabe from Berlin and a project team there, do this together with independent project partners from Kenya, Senegal, specifically the Nest Collective from Nairobi and Malik Ndiaye from the Musée Théodore Monod in Dakar. The Talking Objects Lab is a process. It is not about organizing events or projects with a clear beginning and ending, but about continuing results, reflecting on mistakes, and developing organically. Our website is an archive. There are 5 thematic areas of focus that are constantly evolving. First, decolonizing forms of memory. Second, decolonizing knowledge. Third, re-evaluating objects from colonial contexts. 4, empowerment and opportunities through artistic perspectives, and 5, questions to classical museum forms of preservation and presentation. In June 2020, our launch event for the Talking Objects Lab took place simultaneously in Berlin and Nairobi. Unexpected lessons number 1, decolonizing memory and knowledge. A performative discussion festival hybrid. We had keynotes, panels, and artistic interventions. There was a film program and space for discussion and encounter for the corona-conditioned, unfortunately very limited number of audience members on site. But the conference can still be viewed on our website. The hybridity of the event allowed us to have unexpected lessons happen simultaneously in Berlin and in Nairobi. We decentralized the discussion. Our second event in December 2020, Le Langage des Objets at the Musée Théodore Monod in Dakar, focused more explicitly on the talking objects. What are they anyway? Together with artists and experts from various disciplines, we gathered to discuss the identities of objects and the knowledge that is inherent in them. We ask what knowledge is hidden, what memories are archived, what do they have to tell us, and how can we make them speak? How do they acquire agency, escape the status of their objectification? We know that objects are not simply objects. They became objects, artifacts, when they were stolen from their ancestral context, where they fulfilled very different functions. We at Talking Objects are not so much interested, though, in research or restoration of old contexts and usage. We ask what role the objects can take on today as agents of a colonial past and as mediators of a still unknown future. This event was followed in May last year by the third event, Revisiter les Objets, and due to limited time, I will not go into that further. All events are, as I said, documented in detail on our website. Nevertheless, I would like to talk about one event, Unexpected Lessons number 2, Decolonizing Nature, that happened last September in Reykjavik, Iceland, on invitation by the Goethe Institute London. It was about, the title refers to it, nature. Against the backdrop of Iceland's extraordinary nature, a geologically highly interesting area that can be perceived as an archive of the Earth's history, nature became the other object, based on the idea of an expanded concept of object. We asked ourselves, what makes nature the other? What roles do the separation of nature and culture play in this? Is the culture-nature dichotomy even tenable? And how can we decolonize our view of the world and think of nature differently? The event in Iceland followed a one-day think tank in Nairobi in July. It focused on seed archives and their colonial entanglements, on the colonization of land, on lost indigenous knowledge about plants and herbal medicine, on nature as an archive of memory, and on philosophy as nature. Now I would like to talk less about the event itself, which is of course also documented on our website, than about the general conditions and what happened behind the scenes. Talking about all the great results of these projects sometimes makes us forget that we cannot only talk about the content, but must also take into account the conditions in which these projects are embedded. A few weeks after our experience in Iceland, we had a crisis meeting with our Kenyan project partners. Unexpected Lessons, Decolonizing Nature took place by invitation. We were a team of 4 curators, 2 of them with EU passports and 2 with passports from Kenya who need a visa to enter Iceland. 9 people were invited as guests of our on-site program, 2 of whom needed visas, the others were either Icelanders or had EU passports. One person of Cameroonian origin, descent, who had been living and working in Berlin for years, happened to obtain permanent residence status in Germany in time after years of struggle. One of our curatorial team was lucky enough to have a still valid 1-year multiple entry visa, which she had due to several projects in Germany. That means 3 people had to apply for a visa for Iceland at the Danish embassy in Kenya, which, it turned out, only in the process requires even more specific documents than a standard Schengen visa. For example, a police clearance certificate. I don't think I need to talk any further about the absurd visa processes here. You know exactly what I'm talking about. A visa practice that puts our guests quite fundamentally under suspicion of illegality is necessarily also part of our discussions. One guest received her visa 1 week before departure. One participant received it so late that the flight had to be rebooked very expensively and inconveniently after we discussed whether it would be worth coming at all. One curator of the event did not get her visa at all and had to be videoed in. You can find loads of reports on dehumanizing border policies online, and airports like the Frankfurt airport are known for being particularly strict. We also have to talk about this when we talk about restitution. African artifacts are welcome, but not the people who created them. I will now talk about tonight's program. Right after this, Wale Lawal will moderate a panel on Beyond Restitution, Rooms for Possible Futures. And then there will be like a spoken word contribution by Ayomide Fasedu. And after that, there will be like the second panel on transnational collaborations and allyship moderated by Tracy and Michael. And the finale of the whole event will be a performance by Tolu Ami Williams titled Bemi, Outside in the Courtyard. Before I leave the stage to Wale and his panel, I would like to show a little video clip. I asked some cooperation partners and friends in advance if they would send in video messages. Some of them replied in time, so I can show you the videos here today. Others took a little longer, so these videos can be viewed later on the Talking Objects website. The entire event is being recorded. I'm sure you've already noticed. As soon as possible, everything then will be available for free online, and you will be notified so that you can share the info with your friends and family. I would also like to take the opportunity to thank all the panelists and moderators and artists to make this evening possible. Thank you to Dr. Njoki Ngumi, Professor Dr. Albert Guafo, and Professor Dr. Benedict Savoy for sending in video messages, and to Femi Johnson and Professor Ariella Aisha Azulai for sharing your films, actually, for screening here tonight. I would like to thank the German Federal Cultural Foundation and the ZKU for the possibility of this residency. A big thank you goes to the Museum Angewandte Kunst in Frankfurt, my employee in Germany, for their support of this important research journey, to the G.A.S. Foundation for the help and warm welcome, to the Heinrich Böll Foundation Abuja for the financial support, and last but not least to the Republic Journal. The current issue gave me important input for the development of this event and let me finally meet Wale, to whom I am handing over shortly. Wale Lawal is a founder of the Republic, a startup building business and creative tools for creators across Africa. He is also the editor-in-chief of the Republic's award-winning magazine covering news, debates, and ideas on politics, culture, science, and more from a Nigerian lens. Wale is co-founder of G.A.S, a digital payments and community management platform for real estate providers. He is an ex-KPMG management consultant and a graduate from the University of Oxford, where his research focused on the politics of tech startups in Nigeria, and he graduated top of his class. In 2019, Wale was selected by G.A.S as one of Africa's top 30 innovators. In 2021, he was selected by Reuters as a global thought leader and by Forbes as one of Africa's 30 under 30. Wale has published short fiction and has exhibited artwork at several venues, including the Venice Biennale. Wale has also written the Future Yoruba exhibit for the forthcoming John Randall Center for Yoruba Culture and History. Thank you very much for being here with us tonight. And now I'm finally leaving the stage, and first the clip, and then the panel. Thank you.